The battlefield was chaos and smoke when Jake Harper saw the small figure stumbling through the ruins, and his instincts screamed at him to ignore it, because every alien on this planet was supposed to be his enemy. But something made him look closer, and he realized it was a child. The kid was maybe 6 or 7 in human years, with pale blue skin and those large dark eyes that all the Kareen had, and she was crying and covered in dust from the collapsed building behind her, and Jake knew he should keep moving because his squad was already 3 blocks ahead, but his feet stopped anyway. The Kareen had attacked Earth's colonies first and killed thousands of people, and now humanity was here on their homeworld, fighting back, and command had made it clear that mercy was not part of the mission, but Jake had a daughter back home named Lily, who was about the same age, and he could not walk away. He moved toward the child, and she saw him and froze in terror, and he raised his hands slowly and said, "Hey, it's okay," in the softest voice he could manage, and she did not run. And he pulled a ration bar from his pack and held it out, and after a long moment she took it with trembling hands. That was when the mother appeared, and she came around the corner of a broken wall, moving fast with a weapon in her hands, and Jake could have shot her easily, but he did not. And instead he stepped between her and the child and held up both hands and said, "I am not going to hurt her." The Kareen woman was tall and lean with the same blue skin as her daughter, and her eyes were filled with rage and fear and grief all at once. And she kept the weapon pointed at Jake's chest and said something in her language that he did not understand. But the meaning was clear. Jake slowly reached up and removed his helmet so she could see his face, and he said, "Look, I have a kid too, and I just want to help." And he gestured to the little girl who was now clutching her mother's leg, and the woman's eyes moved between Jake and her daughter, and something in her expression shifted. She lowered the weapon slightly and said in broken human language, "Why you help?" And Jake said, "Because she is just a kid, and your people and my people are fighting, but she did not start this war." The woman stared at him for a long time, and then she said something to her daughter in their language, and the girl nodded, and the woman looked back at Jake and said, "You come," and Jake did not understand at first, but she gestured for him to follow, and he knew it was insane, but he went anyway. She led him through the ruins to a basement shelter where a dozen other Kareen civilians were hiding, and they all looked at Jake with terror when he entered. But the woman spoke to them quickly, and they relaxed slightly, and Jake realized she was telling them he was safe. Her name was Vera, and her daughter was called Lena. And over the next 3 hours, Jake helped them secure the shelter and shared his medical supplies to treat the wounded and gave them food and water from his pack, and Vera watched him the entire time, with an expression he could not read. When Jake's comm unit crackled to life with his commander demanding his position, he knew he had to leave, and he stood and said, "I have to go now." And Vera stood too and said, "No." "You stay." Jake shook his head and said, "I cannot stay. My people will come looking, and if they find me here, they will kill everyone." And Vera grabbed his arm with surprising strength and said, "Then you come back later. You come when fighting stops." Jake looked into her eyes and saw something desperate there, and he said, "Why do you care?" And Vera said, "Because you see my child as child, not as enemy. And that means you are different. And I need different right now." The war ended 2 months later, and humanity won, but at a terrible cost, and the Kareen were forced to accept occupation terms, and Jake requested assignment to the reconstruction efforts on the Kareen homeworld, and he returned to the city where he had fought. He found Vera and Lena still living in that shelter, and when Vera saw him, she did something unexpected, and she smiled and said, "You came back," and Jake said, "I promised." Didn't I? Over the following weeks, Jake visited them regularly and brought supplies and helped them rebuild. And Vera began teaching him her language, and he taught Lena some human words, and the girl started to trust him and would sit on his knee while he read stories from his datapad. Other humans in his unit asked why he spent so much time with the locals, and Jake said someone has to build bridges, and they laughed and said good luck with that. But Jake did not care what they thought. Vera told him one night that her husband had died in the war and that she had been alone trying to protect Lena, and she said, "You saved us that day, not just from bullets but from losing hope." And Jake did not know what to say to that. Months passed, and Jake's assignment was extended, and he found himself thinking about Vera and Lena more than he thought about his own life back on Earth, and his daughter Lily was grown now, and did not need him the way she once did, and he realized he had found something here that felt like purpose. Vera asked him, one evening, why he stayed. And Jake said, honestly, I am not sure anymore, and Vera said, I think you stay because you know we need you. And Jake said, maybe. Or maybe I need you too. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she took his hand and said, I will not let you go, Jake Harper. And you know why. And Jake said, why? And Vara said, because you see us as people, and that is rarest thing in universe. Jake stayed on the Kareen homeworld, and eventually he requested permanent residency, and his commanders thought he was crazy but approved it anyway. And Vara and Lena became his family in ways he had never expected. Years later, when Lena was grown and had children of her own, she asked Jake why he had saved them that day. And Jake said because it was the right thing to do, and Lena smiled and said, no, you did it because you are a good person and there are not enough of those. Vara was sitting beside him and she squeezed his hand and said, I told you I would not let you go. And Jake laughed and said, best decision I never made. And Vara said, no, it was my decision and you just went along with it. And Jake realized she was right, because from the moment he had stepped between her and danger, she had chosen him, and she had held on, and she had refused to let him walk away, and somehow that had saved them both.